All right, welcome everyone to the November Madison user community group. We're going to have our short little introduction slide, and we're going to be passing off to Daniel and Lourdes for the how to write effective and maintainable validation rules. So, back. This is how you can get a hold of us if you have questions, issues, you want us to be a speaker, got a topic idea. You know, Brian and Jen and I, we typically manage the Madison side. Squire's in charge of the Milwaukee, but we're all one happy family, so we all help each other out. Squire, I believe you're still looking for a potential co-leader.
Yeah, and there was some conversation with the community heads as well about that. So I am still looking for help in any way we can get it. But there could be a new update in January. So just reach out if you've got something, or if you've got an interest in helping. I mean,
perfect. All right. So why are we here? Well, networking, which is a little bit more difficult in the world of Zoom, but we're here. We have our little collaboration group. We're here to basically help each other out. There is no such thing as a stupid question or a stupid answer. We want to hear from you. So if you got something, please speak up, post in our community group, talk about it here. We're all about trying to help us succeed based on our experience, our knowledge, and sometimes our failures. So make sure that if you got anything, like you see something and you go, "Oh, cool," post about it, because I'll guarantee someone out there didn't know about it. And we do want to hear from you. We need stories. We need presentations. It could be about a project that you did that was successful, or even a project that you did that failed. Sometimes we learn the most from our failures. About some NITO. I don't know how long it's been NITO. Some NITO Salesforce tips and tricks, which can be anything, right? Maybe you learned something really cool that you didn't know about, like using custom permissions in automation, right? They could be cool. Let's share it, talk about it, because we want to spread our knowledge all across our community. That's how we grow together. It does not have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be like a 45-minute presentation that you're going to do at Dreamforce some year. It could literally be a 15 minutes. Hey, this is who I am. This is what we did. This is the lessons learned. If I was going to do something different, this is what I would be and why. Right? It could be something really short and sweet, and that's perfectly fine. There's a whole bunch of us out there in our community. We've been slowly growing in Wisconsin. We're no longer the one community group for the entirety of state that we used to be. We got marketers, we got a developer group out there. We have marketing groups out there. I believe there's a nonprofit group nearby. And then we have a bunch of extra stuff like Salesforce Saturdays. Are you guys meeting yet, Jen?
We are not. I'm sorry. We are not. We should.
Oh, yeah. In some capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Upcoming events. It's kind of empty, now that we're here at Dreamforce. There is a community calendar. The one thing to say is you should hold December 13th, which is the second Tuesday next month, for a Milwaukee user group. Topic, speakers to be determined and announced later.
I know there are some local community events happening out there. That's why we just included the links. And I know that the New York World Tour is happening, I think, next week for Salesforce, but it's hard to keep up with all of them. That's why we threw the links in there for you to utilize if you were wanting to check out something happening that isn't here.
At this point, we want to open it up to everyone in the group. Does anyone have anything they want to announce for a job opportunity that you're trying to find or fill? Celebrations, like anyone got a new certification?
I'm trying to get the Wisconsin Women in Tech group started again. So I'm working on that, and I'll reach out to everyone here in case they want to join that once I get stuff going.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I don't remember if I mentioned it the last time we were on, but I got the field service cert and started looking into strategy designer next. So
Congratulations, John. I heard the field service is kind of a bear. How was it?
actually I had done the best in that one than I had done since I took my first admin cert. So
Okay. Well, good job.
yeah.
Aubrey, you got you're either have your hand up or you're applauding. I'm not sure which.
Oh, I was applauding, but I got a few at Dreamforce. So
Oh,
I
what
guess
did
I
you get at
can go.
Dreamforce?
I got the Associate Advanced Admin and Platform App Builder.
Wow. Congratulations.
I like taking tests.
Three certs at Dreamforce. That's a lot. Good job.
It was quiet in the testing room.
Okay. Anyone else? Great. Well, at that point, I'm going to hand this off to Daniel and Lourdes, who are going to be talking about validation rule. And we really do appreciate that they came to join and give us a little presentation that they did at Dreamforce this year. So you should be able to share your screens at this point. So
I'll do that.
take it away.
Let me know if you can see my screen. Should be slides.
Yes, we're looking at your
Yep.
slides.
Awesome. All right. So this is our presentation on writing effective and maintainable validation rules. My name is Lourdes. I am a senior member of technical staff at Salesforce in the Trailhead content engineering team. And Daniel's with me. He's a director of the Trailhead content engineering team. Forward-looking statement, please make all your purchasing decisions based on what is currently available, not in what you may or may not see here today. First of all, thank you for being here, and we hope that you get out of this presentation excited about validation rules and maybe learn a thing or two. So what your journey is going to be, we're going to first talk about alternatives to validation rules or things that you might want to do on top of writing the validation rules. We're going to talk how validation rules work, the design principles, and some gotchas that you might have not encountered yet, but you will probably encounter in the future. So things to look out for. So first of all, validation rules are fantastic. They help prevent user error. They help you log fields or records from certain users, roles or profiles from editing them. They can help validate against reference data. So there's so many use cases for this. But with great power comes great responsibility, and we want to use them with caution. Because the overuse of validation rules or the using validation rules without guardrails might become frustrating. So how can it become frustrating? Imagine that you have a user that is logging, creating a new contact, and you have a bunch of fields and they spend, I don't know, like 5 minutes or 3 minutes populating the form, and then like click on save, they get a bunch of errors. This is not a great experience, and when it happens again and again, it can become frustrating. It can also lead to junk data. If you create validation rules or make fields require where they might not always have the information, they can just enter junk data, and junk data is worse than no data at all. So look out for those. And the last thing, they multiply quickly. They're so useful and also very easy to create. So make sure that you are creating these validation rules when truly necessary. And yeah, those are my wording signs. So before jumping into writing these validation rules, we need to look at a few things before just doing it. First, look at your process design and optimization. How complex is your application? Because complexity is the enemy of execution. You want your applications to be process-driven, meaning that when your users go to your records, they can automatically see in a very organic way what they need to do next in order to move the process along, instead of looking at a record that just throws data at them without any, I don't know, structure. And your user should be able to organically know what to do in order to move the process to the next stage, instead of having your validation rules just throwing errors at them in order for them to know what needs to happen next. So another cool thing that you could do is, of course, make fields required or read-only in your layouts. This is better than doing validation rules because it's a visual, right? Like your user will automatically know that because of the red dots that they need to populate that field, or not letting them populate the field and make it a read-only, they will not make the mistake. So that's a way to help your user. Another thing, you can make the field required org-wide by making it required at the field level, or you can make it required only on the layouts. The difference is that if you make it required at the org level, if users enter data through the data loader, they will get the errors if they don't populate it. But if you only do it on the layout, you're gonna let users upload data through data loader or other APIs, and they don't need to necessarily populate the field. So think of what your scenario is. But what I want you to leave with in this specific slide is try to make your pages like visually intuitive to users. Dependent pick lists are also a great tool because you're going to prevent your user from making mistakes. In this specific state, in this specific example, I have stage, and then reason, that is a dependent pick list on stage. So when they select the closed loss stage, they're only going to be able to select 3 of the reasons that apply to that specific stage that they chose. So they won't be able to select a reason that doesn't have anything to do with closed loss. But if you, instead of doing this, do it with the validation rule, you're gonna let the user pick an invalid reason and then tell them, you're wrong, why do you do that? You know, so I think this is a great tool for, again, preventing your user from making mistakes and guiding them through the process. Dynamic forms are, throughout the last years, they have been releasing a lot of cool features that allow you, like, let you make your apps more process driven and very intuitive. For example, in this case, I'm making a field be required at the beginning of the state of the process and not required at the end of the process. And the way that I'm doing this is dropping the field twice on the page and giving them opposite criteria. And one of the fields is going to be required on the page and the other one not. So that when I'm at the beginning of the process, it's going to ask me to populate that field, and at the end, I don't need to do it. So this is a way of, instead of throwing them validation rules again, having them, give them a visual clue of what they need to do using dynamic forms. Also with dynamic forms, you can show and hide fields or hold sections that may be in a specific state or process. They don't necessarily need to populate, or is not important in that specific stage. And they can focus on what they need to do in the specific moment. Path is fantastic at giving you also a visual cue of what's going on. So notice how we have also key fields where you can drop the fields that are specific or important in the phase that you're on. And also you can add guidance, explaining them what they need to do on that specific stage or how they can move the process along. You can also see the steps that you need to take after, and also the steps that you have completed. So that's a great way of making your applications and your pages process driven instead of data driven. Screen flows let you create custom visuals or custom experiences when creating, for example, new records. In this case, instead of throwing a bunch of fields to the users when they create a new contact, maybe I know that in my specific business, when my users create the contacts, they only know a few information, or we only need to populate just a few fields at the beginning, and then when they get more relationship with the contacts, they add them later. So in here, what I'm doing, I'm asking them for very specific information, maybe the phone number. And if they don't populate the phone number, then I'm asking them for the address. So the flows let you get some data, analyze it, and based on that information, maybe ask for more or just continue and insert the record. And again, this is a way of like not over giving the user too much information when they don't need it, and letting them have a nice experience when creating records. Filtering criteria on lookup fields is also a really good tool because, for example, we have an account field on opportunity, and we only want or opportunities to be related to accounts where the account is active. So instead of creating a validation rule that checks if your opportunity is related to an active account, you can create a filtering criteria that doesn't even let you select the inactive account in the first place. Notice how here, when I type Burlington, the account doesn't show up because it's filtering out accounts that are inactive. So again, this is another way of preventing your users from making mistakes. And last but not least, always documentation and training, regardless of how user-friendly your app is. You should always have documentation so that if your user gets stuck, they have somewhere to go and like search for information. And also, Salesforce offers in-app guidance, which is a really cool tool for, like, you have noticed that your users get stuck in a specific part of the process. Maybe add some guidance that shows up when they get to a certain stage, or when they update the field to a certain value, drop some guidance there to let them know what they need to do next. And also, when you drop new features, you can let them know there's a new feature, take a look at it and give us feedback. So now that we know all the things that we could do to make our app process-driven, not data-driven, and where we make it in such a nice way where your users don't even run into validation rules, there are some situations where you still need to write these validation rules even though your app is perfect, because there's other ways in which your users can load the data via data loader or other APIs. Maybe they run an Apex script, who knows? And you still need to safeguard your data to make sure that it is consistent and you don't have bad data. So how do validation rules work? You simply write a formula that is going to get evaluated with the new values of your record. And if that formula evaluates to true, then your error message is going to show. This is a really tricky thing, or something that you need to add a bit more attention, that the rule that you're writing is for the negative scenario. So, and if your validation rule evaluates to false, then the record is going to continue to get committed to the database, and lots of more things are going to happen to it. A cool thing is if statements is not required. Notice how in this screenshot, we have the if statement and then the clause, and then at the end we say true or false. But in reality, we don't need to wrap anything around an if statement because the or, it's going to return true or false by itself. So when do validation rules fire? Validation rules fire before save triggered record flows, and before triggers. So what does this mean? It means that If you have a validation rule that's specific to, is supposed to trigger on some logic, and you create the record, you click on save, and you're expecting that rule to fire, but it doesn't. And you're like, I wonder why that happened. It might be because you have some triggers or some record trigger flows that are overriding your record and causing your validation rule not to fire anymore because it doesn't apply anymore because your record was updated. And this could happen many times, and that's the reason why we need to know the order of operations of what happens after you click on save. And this is a very small picture of everything that happens. In our resources slide, we have all the links to or the resources, including this one. It's a huge chart of everything that happened when you click on save on a record. There are exceptions for multi-line items, like whole line items and opportunity line items. The validation rules are going to run before the record trigger flows and before triggers. So just keep an eye out for that. You can traverse object relationships with validation rules, the same things that you could do with a formula. In this example, we're going from work order to sub work order to opportunity to account type. So we're checking that the work order's account type is prospect, and then the manager needs to review. If it's false, then it's gonna throw an error. So as you can see, using that notation, we just traverse through all the relationships, child to parent. Now that we sort of know how to create validation rules and all the things that we need to do before creating the validation rule, and let's take a look at some cool features that if maybe you have experience writing the validation rules, you might not know. So you can use VLOOKUPs with validation rules. VLOOKUPs work the same as spreadsheets VLOOKUPs. The difference is that instead of your reference data being a spreadsheet, your reference data is going to be a Salesforce object. In this use case, we have a custom territory assignment object that allows you to control, that allows controlling a tiered territory model. So this validation rule checks that once the owner changed in a lead, that the new lead is inside of the new owner territory. And it just checks against the custom territory assignment object to make sure that the owner is within the lead's territory. And you can imagine how many other use cases you can have, but I think this is a pretty cool feature. Also, you can use custom settings. Custom settings is a way of storing org-wide setting or maybe even profile or user-specific settings. An example is if you have like a max discount value for your users. In the specific validation rule, we have if the discount is greater than the max discount, then it's just gonna throw an error because you're discounting it more than you're supposed to. And so what's gonna happen here, you can only use hierarchical custom settings in validation rules. So once the validation rule sees that it has a custom setting, it's gonna check if the user has a custom setting of max discount specific for the user. If it doesn't, it's gonna look at the profile. If the profile doesn't have a specific discount, it's gonna look at the org-wide and then check what's the org-wide discount. It's 52. It's greater than it's less than the discount. So that's a pretty cool feature that it's gonna help you a lot in validation rules. If you have settings that get used a lot in your org, you just write it here, and when you need to make the update, you just update the custom setting instead of updating all the references where you're using that custom setting manually. Custom metadata is similar to custom setting, but you cannot do the user specific or role specific custom setting, but it has many other, you can do it has many other cool features that maybe we're not going to cover here, but I incline you to look at them. So in this specific case, we have a validation rule where if the support tier is silver, it's going to look at a custom metadata record that we have in our org and look at the minimum spending for silver and minimum spending for gold. And if it's greater than the total spending, then it's going to throw an error. So again, these are features of Salesforce that allow you to store org-wide settings that are specific to your business. And once you change it in your setting, it's going to automatically apply to all the references that you have them. And last but not least, we have regular expressions. Validation rules can use these regular expressions to validate text fields. For example, you have a phone number that you want them to enter with a specific format with like certain dashes and parentheses, or maybe social security number that you want them to enter the dash after 3 and then 2 and then 4, or maybe zip code. So this is a way that you can validate text, any type of text. And you might think, this is overwhelming. Do I have to learn this now? And the cool thing is, it's not like you don't have to. If you want to, it's really cool language, but you don't have to. There's a lot of examples out there. Even Salesforce has, which we have in the resources, has a lot of examples that might apply to your scenario. So I would first go into the world of the internet and see if your scenario is out there before trying to learn it. But I would still recommend learning. And now, Daniel is going to talk about design guidelines.
All right, I'm going to share my screen so that I don't have to have Lourdes click next. So let me switch to that. Okay. So used to Google Meet. I'm going to have to get, all right, we're here, slideshow. Great. Oh no, there we go. All right, so thanks Lourdes for talking us through you know, all the ways that we can structure our app and our UI so that we may not even need a validation rule, and then talking us through some of the special features that validation rules have. I saw some comments in there about regex and some of the VLOOKUP, so I'm glad that we're giving you some information that maybe you weren't aware of. So you've decided that you need a validation rule. Let's talk about like how can we design this validation rule so that it's friendly for our as friendly as can be for our users. So in this example, I've got my example error message here. When stage is qualification or higher, you must enter an amount, and then you can see an error code there, and I'll talk about the error code in a minute. So the first thing we want to do is make this error message very clear. So we want to be very specific about what's caused this rule to trigger. So we don't want to just be like, hey, dummy, you made a mistake. You know, check all your fields and try again. We want to be very specific about each thing. So in this case, we're telling them what triggered the rule, that the stage has to, what triggered the rule is that our stage is in qualification or higher, and we don't have an amount. So we know that in this case, I know exactly what the problem is. So I either need to change my stage or I need to change the amount. I've also included this error code. And what this error code does is it's a nice little indicator for you as an admin to know where this came from. So if you get a screenshot, or if you get a user reach out to you and say, hey, I can't save, I get this error message, instead of you like having them tell you what the error message is and then you trying to figure out where it is, like sifting through it, you just, as you know, they kind of zone out until you hear, oh, then there's this OPP003, and you go, aha, I know exactly where that is. And so you can just go into your setup, go into validation rules for opportunity, because OPP is going to stand for opportunity in this case, then you're going to be the third one, because that's going to you're going to name it the same in your setup. So they're all going to be sorted, and you're just going to find the third one in there. So much easier to find it. This is really, really helpful on cross-object updates. So I don't know how many people have had a validation rule hit because some child object has been updated and that fired, and the validation rule of the parent fires. And you've spent all this time looking on, let's say in this case, you're looking on an opportunity, and you realize that, no, that's actually because there's a roll-up happening and something is updating on the account, and you're hitting an account validation rule. And so I before I started this code, I literally probably spent an hour one time looking for a validation rule, and realized finally that it was on a different object than the one that they were saving. So we'll talk a little bit more about cross-object updates, but to me, this is a big time saver for you. Where do you want to put that error? The error is also important to think about. For the most part, I would recommend putting that error message at a field. So in this case, this one is going to be probably on the amount. So it's going to be on the amount field. I'm telling them and they have to enter an amount. So I'm going to put my validation rule on amount. It doesn't really make sense to probably put it on stage because my rule is probably that they've changed the stage. And so I want them to enter something in the amount. So I'm going to put it there on that field. The benefit of that is then the error message that you get in Lightning when you hit save, they can just click on when it says there's errors, there's going to be a link that'll click them. They'll be able to jump right to that page, that part of the page to enter it. So they don't have to go and scroll up and down. And the worst is having an error message that's at top of page because they don't have a visual indicator of what they need to do. And related to that, we want to cover one scenario at a time. It might be really tempting to combine your validation rules. So like in this example, let's say you have multiple things that are needed to be entered when your stage moves to qualification. You might be tempted to put all those fields into one single validation rule that says, when qualification's changed, I need all these fields. Well, you're going to have to put that error message at the top of the page, and then your users are going to get really frustrated because one, they're going to have to scroll up and down looking for these fields and figure out where they are, and that's not great. So let's split them up into multiple validation rules and give them directed input on where to fill it in. Okay, so part of this presentation is about making them maintainable. Lourdes has alluded to a couple things like using custom metadata types and custom settings, which you can use that and reuse those across your org. You can also reuse formulas. So I've got this formula field called stage name, and what this is a simple formula that does a case statement and just looks at your stage name and assigns a number to each stage. The benefit of this is the progression that we want our stages to go in. So I could then use that formula to tell if a stage has changed and what the next. I can use prior value to see what the previous stage number was, and then stage number to see what the current stage number is. So I can say, well, 1, did my stage number change? And 2, if I add 1 to my prior stage number, is it not equal to my current stage number? Meaning, like, did they switch? Did they skip? So did they go straight from prospecting to close 1? So they went from a 1 to a 9. And so we can stop that. In this case, this particular validation rule makes it that you have to progress incrementally. You have to go one stage at a time. You can never skip a stage. And so the benefit of having this formula is not only can we reuse it across, this is being reused within a single validation rule, but we can display it on page layouts if we need to. We can put it on a report. So it can be used in a lot of different places. And if we ever need to make the change, we do it in one place, and we're off and going. We can also use roll-up summary fields to check child objects. So we might have a requirement that we need to know how many we might want to fire a validation rule on an opportunity if there's no accepted quotes yet. So what we can do with that is create a roll-up summary that rolls up. So in this case, my roll-up summary is rolling up from the quote object to the opportunity, and we're just counting the number of accepted quotes that is on that, excuse me, on that that belong to that opportunity. So once we have that formula field, we can then put that into a validation rule. And we can say, in this case, if you're trying to close an opportunity, then it needs an accepted quote. So we can say, well, if the number of accepted quotes is equal to 0, then it won't fire. So that's one way we can use it. But we can also use it. So in this case, great, we've got it where we're trying to change this closed one and we get that error message. But we can also have that same error message being used if we try to edit a child object. So let's say you already have an opportunity that has been marked closed one and it has an accepted quote. If I try to go in and change a quote status to presented, so what will happen then is your roll-up summary field will fire, and it'll fire and try to update the parent opportunity in this case, and it's going to set that number back to 0. Well, my opportunity validation rule has fired. And so it's going to tell me that my opportunity in a closed one stage needs an accepted quote. So this validation rule is not only helping us with changes directly to the opportunity, but we can also prevent those child objects from getting into a situation that we don't want them to be in. Now, you've gotten in, you've created a bunch of validation rules, and you go to do a big update or something, and you realize that you are hitting all these validation rules because you're trying to data load, or you're trying to do something else that maybe you have users that want to get around some of the validation rules, and they have valid reasons for it. So let's talk about an off switch. So how can we give an off switch to our users so that we can turn it off for a particular one? My recommendation is to use a custom permission. So this is yet another Salesforce feature that lets us create these custom permissions, and we can give them to users. Now, a custom permission is like something you do in setup, and it's just basically, it's kind of just a string of text. You just say, like, you can call it whatever you want, and then you assign that custom permission to a permission set, and we can assign that permission set to a permission set group and assign it to the user all as one big group, or you could just assign that permission set directly to the user. The key part of it, though, is the custom permission does need to belong to a permission set. You can't assign a custom permission directly to a user. And here in my example, you can see I've added this not clause right at the beginning of my validation rule. So I'm saying not and then $permission and then the name of my permission, my custom permission. So I'm saying, do they not have this this validation? Do they not have this permission? And because as Lourdes talked about, we need to evaluate to true if we want a validation rule to fire. So it kind of hurts the brain. I mean, I still have trouble with this, but you have to think like, do they not have this permission? Then I want the rule to fire if the other thing is true. So if they have the permission, then it's going to short circuit, and it's going to just like they're never going to display this validation rule for this user. And so we can give this custom permission to our users. Now we can give it to them permanently, but what I really like to do is do it with a session activation. So like as an admin, or maybe you have sales operations, or you have other users that are kind of power users. For the most part, you want those users to follow the rules. You want them to like enter data that meets our guidelines, including all the validation rules, and occasionally let them slip by. But like you want them to think about it. You don't want them to just have it bypass all the time. So what we can do is we can use these permission sets in session activation. So what does that mean? Session activation means that you assign this permission set to a user without actually it being active. There needs to be something that happens to activate that permission set for them for the current session. And one way to do that is give them a flow. So what we could do is create this flow that, as you can see here, has a little decision. And so we create this flow and give this flow to the users, like our sales operations users or admins, as a tab on one of their apps, and says, all right, if you want to bypass your validation rules, then go to this tab and just click next and next, or whatever it takes to get there. And then they'll bypass that validation rule. And then when they want to turn it off, then they go back to that tab and then click next, and it'll deactivate that permission set for them for that session. So the nice thing about this is that this is only for this session. So if they're logged in on another computer somewhere, or even on another browser on the same computer, it's only for that one session, that one browser. So it's being very, very surgical and precise on when they can bypass validation rules, rather than just giving this big hammer and saying, yeah, you can always bypass this. So one cool way to get around that bypass and still making people get in there. So let's put this all together now. So here is an example of a validation rule that says we can't go backwards when our stage is proposal price quote and there's an accepted quote. So if we've already we've given them an accepted quote and the stage is proposal price quote, we can't say take it back, because they've already accepted it. So in this case, what we've done is we've given them a bypass, and I didn't talk about this, but it's kind of up to you to choose how you want to set these custom permissions. I like to do it either by object or by role. So in this case, I've said the custom permission is bypass opportunity validation rules. So I could combine multiple, I could say lead up validation rule, bypass lead rules, bypass opportunity rules, maybe bypass account rules, package those all up into one permission set and call it sales operations opportunity validation rule bypass. Then I can also give that out to different users. So if I said, oh, this user only want to bypass opportunities, I can go that way. If this user only bypass accounts. But that would be on an object level. Some of these objects are shared objects, and maybe your sales and support all do things on the same type of record, like an account, for example. So you might want to name them more the function of what they do. So you might say bypass sales validation rules or bypass support validation rules, and then bucket everything into those. So kind of design wise, think about what works best in your org for that. I mean, you could even get down to combine it together with the role and the object if you really wanted to. But anyways, we have this bypass. Then we're going to look at number of accepted quotes, which is a roll up. And we're going to use we're going to be looking at the prior value of the stage name. And then we're going to be looking at if the stage number is reducing, is going to be getting smaller. So we pile that all together, and then now we can tell the user that they can't go to any earlier stage if they have an accepted quote. And you can see our error messages both here and in the rule name, so that helps us find it. And we're putting it on a particular field, in this case, stage. Okay, great. Gone through, you've created a bunch of validation rules, and there are some gotchas. So you've built all these validation rules, and all of a sudden you've realized you got some, or maybe you started out, you didn't have any validation rules. And then you said, I got messy data, I need to create some validation rules. So you go and create it. Well, what happens if you try to edit existing data? So in this case, we realized that if lead source was other, we wanted some more detail and people weren't filling in this source other. So in this case, I'm editing the student, I'm editing the title, not touching anything else. And all of a sudden I get an error message on a field that I didn't even touch. This is not a great user experience for your users, because they might not know what the source was. So how can we solve that? Well, the first thing that you might try is using a created date, so that you could say, well, you know what? I put this rule in on January 1st of 2022, so any records created after that need to have this source field. But there's a gotcha with that your created date doesn't exist. So if you insert a new record, your validation rule isn't going to actually hit, because you haven't inserted the record into the database and the created date isn't there yet. So you're still going to get bad data in this case. So what we can do to solve that is to add this is new. So we can either the date or say it's new. So we can check both of those situations. Now we'll be able to catch that. Another option is to say, you know what? I want it only if for any new records, or if they go in and change that lead source. So we could target that even a little bit more and say, maybe this record was created before last year, but somebody's going in and changing the lead source on this record from from some value to other. And in that case, when they do that change, I want to require that source other. So you can see I've got an is changed on both. So I have is new and is changed on lead source and is changed on my source other field. So now if we take a look at that, let's look at some examples here. So now I'm going back to my record. I'm changing their title to student and I'm saving and it worked. Great. Let's change our, let's go and we're going to put something into the source other and we can save that. That still works like we expected. We're going to clear, they're going to change the lead source to something that's not other. That also saves. Now we're going to change it back to other and try to save it without a value. Boom, we hit the error message. So now we're going to put in a value and we should be able to save. So then if we try to clear the other field, then we should also get the error message. So you see there's a lot of different paths that we want to test this in. And so you got to think about all the different ways of what might happen. But again, we want to be pretty surgical and try to get only specific spots there. All right, let's look at another one. So I talked about how you could use the roll-up summaries to help you ensure some data, but sometimes this causes maybe some issues. So in this example, when the account type is customer, the account number cannot be blank. That's our validation rule. But let's say that you might have somebody in sales that that might go and update an opportunity, and that causes some roll up to the account to fire, and then it forces them to put an account number. They're in sales. They don't know it. They don't know the account number. That's a accounting. That's an accounting function. So you might end up with some bad data as a result of this. So rather, what we could do in this case, we could say, we could use the this close won opportunities as the roll up that's causing this for the sales department to hit this. And so we could say, you know what, if we only want to fire this error message if that field has not been changed. So in this case, we know that it's not coming from a child record update, that this would be an edit directly to the record to cause this validation rule to hit. Okay, I think this is my final gotcha. So I don't know if anybody has some old orgs, but if you have an org before 2008, this setting's not available, and you really want this setting. So in lead settings, there's a setting called require validation for converted leads, and if you don't have this checkbox checked, when you convert a lead to an account contact opportunity, none of your validation rules would fire and you could end up with some messy data. So my recommendation is check this box. But if you have a really old org and you don't see it, then you need to contact support to enable. And there's a help document. You could probably search for this pretty quickly to find it. But that's so any old orgs and for some reason this isn't here, contact support, but double check to make sure that this is in here, because I'm sure you'd want to have your validation on these objects that get generated from a lead, because otherwise you're going to end up with some pretty messy data in there. So I've given you a lot of information, and so what if you had to walk away or I guess when you leave this Zoom call, what do you want to what do I want you to know? First, consider all of your options before you implement your validation rule. Lourdes talked about a ton of features that we have on the Salesforce platform to help us guide our users through process and get them to the point where they have the information when they're ready. That we ask for the information when they're ready to enter it, not before. We want to design those rules so they align with our business process, again, so that we know we're going to ask them for this information when they need it or when something changes to get to that situation, not just firing on every time you edit the record. Include that error code so you don't confuse users or yourself. Put that bypass switch in early. You may not think you need it, but put it in. You'll be very happy the next time. The next time you need to do a validate or a data load, and you start hitting a bunch of validation rules. And then be sure to use those functions like is new and is changed to be targeted on finding, identifying the particular use cases of when something might need to have a validation rule fired. And finally, here's some resources for you to follow up. You can either scan the QR code or type that link in. I guess I could probably just copy and paste this into the chat as well. But there's a couple of modules from Trailhead, and then some links to sample validation rules and help and training, some regex examples, and then that order of operations that that Lourdes had also presented, talked about as well. So thanks for sitting through that, and I would love to answer any questions that anybody has. And I, as you probably saw, I think Lourdes and I both work on Trailhead, so we're also, if you have questions about Trailhead, we could probably try to answer some of those too. We work particularly, what our team does is we're responsible for the publication of content. So all the modules and badges that go up on Trailhead come through the tooling that our team builds. In addition, our team writes the validations that are for your hands-on challenges. So when you write hands-on challenges and you click check challenge, code that maybe Lourdes has written is checking your challenge for you. So so happy to answer any questions about validation rules. Or potentially Trailhead as well. So, and oh, Jen, thank you for commenting. You know what? That would be a great thing to add to our presentation, that you can put comments in your validation rules. I think that is a great thing to call out. So. The comment is, I believe it's just a slash.
Double slash. Or no, slash asterisk.
Yeah, I was
with the
gonna say.
asterisk.
As I say, it looks like that, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
I have a pretty complex one where I ended up having to put in comments because every time I would open up that validation rule, I was like, what is this doing again? And unfortunately, this description just didn't provide me with enough characters and just, it's nice to read it in context. And in fact, even in that validation rule that I'm using, we have the bypass permission assigned to admin so that we can get past that validation rule. And I have a comment in there exactly that says exclude users with this custom permission from the validation rule.
Nice.
Super helpful for when you're trying to troubleshoot validation rules or understand what someone else wrote.
Or what you wrote.
Or what you wrote. I totally wrote this one. So, yep.
I got a question for you. So you used custom permission for bypassing your example. And I know prior to custom permissions, hierarchical custom setting was one of the common things.
Right.
Why not keep using those?
You could, and I think for this presentation, I went with my preference, and what I like about custom permissions is that it has some of the features like a hierarchical custom setting does, but I think even better because you can assign it to a permission set, you can assign that permission set to any users. It doesn't matter on what the hierarchy is. So you're moving away from profile. And that's sort of what I think the future, that if you talk to Cheryl, she doesn't want us using profiles anymore. So I think sticking to that permission set, and then the ability to, if you want to even take it that step further, to make it be session activated, I think is a really nice touch, which you can't do with a hierarchical custom setting.
Can you use the expiration feature permission set?
Yeah, you should be able to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That might be a better option than the session activation.
Yeah, because using a session activation on data loads would be hard because you can't go and click a flow. You have a different session for your data load, so there might be cases where you do need to give that permission directly, and using an expiration date on your permission set might be great for that too.
I got another question, but before I open my big mouth again, does anyone else?
I have one question.
Go ahead.
So, is there a best practice in terms of like when should I be concerned as an admin in terms of the number of validation rules we have on an object? So like I know that there is a really high limit of how many validation rules you can create, but is there a threshold on like, okay, you have 100, you should not add more or revisit? I mean, I can't see a scenario where you would have 100, but I want to know what's your opinion in this space.
That's a great question. My take on this is it just depends on your org. I don't think I haven't, or at least I haven't read of a hard set of amount of validation rules that after that you shouldn't. I think when it becomes hard to maintain, I think the code, like the error code that Daniel was talking about, it's really helpful when you have so many validation rules. But I haven't read at least of a standard amount of validation rules I shouldn't go over.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's an object limit. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what it is. 150 maybe. But I think, I think from a performance point of view, I haven't seen, I mean, I have been using, things like like really targeting my validation rules in my company I was at before I joined Salesforce. I probably had over 100 validation rules on opportunity, and we didn't see it. I would say performance was not degraded because of the number of validation rules. If you're running into performance problems, it's probably because you've got too much automation on that record rather than your validation rules. So I'd probably look at validation rules first, look at all of your other automation before worrying about the validation rules.
Yeah, I mean, like I haven't hit the performance issue, but like this is usually part of the conversations every time we want to add more validations rules. Like somewhere in my head, like we want to limit the number of validation rules we have. So that's why I was curious, like is there a best practice to, or is that something that I just made up this best practice of let's not add more because it can cause performance issues. I mean, so
right.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Do you think you would still have 100 validation rules in that org, or with the new tech would you have quite a few less, like dynamic forms or dynamic
Yeah, I think in a lot of cases we still put in validation rules because while you have your dynamic forms and other things to guide the user, there's so many ways that people can update records. They can update it through list views, or they can update it through, through the API. So, in a large org that you have, potentially a lot of integrations and other things too, that I think validation rules are still good because you're not always going through the UI and not through those particular page layouts. So they may not hit them that often because you have it designed it's such that they're probably not, they're guided down the right path. But I think those validation rules are in there as guide rails to, if they do happen to find some way around the UI to get them, keep the data clean.
Got it. Thanks.
So when you're putting bypasses in the validation rules, do you create a custom permission for each validation rule you write, or do you tend to lump them in and say, here's all my bypass all opportunity validation rules?
Yeah, I have done it more, I guess mine has been more around role. So where I've done it as like these are sales validation rules, or these are support validation rules is probably more of where I do it. Kind of start there, and then, but sometimes I've said, oh, you know what, I need to get a little more granular because we get down there. So I think it takes a little bit of thought and probably going back and changing it. you know, things like the nice thing is you can put one custom permission in or multiple custom permissions into one permission set. So having it granular at like the object level is not really a bad idea because you can just put all those custom permissions into a single permission set and assign that permission set to a user so that you don't really have to think about it too much, but it gives you the future to be able to then say, you know what, I don't want to give this user. Later, you might then just split your permission sets and say, you know what, I need to split my permission sets up so that I have users with just opportunity bypass and lead bypass instead.
One other thing, the cool thing about having the bypass or custom permission at the role level is that you can also use it not only on validation rules, but to display certain things on breaker pages. For example, if you have a sales super user custom permission, maybe in your sales pages you want to show like an extra components that only they can access. So you can reuse that custom permission for validation rules and also on other parts of the org. So that's another win for role-based, but it depends.
All right, I got a question for you, Lourdes. So at the start, you kind of said, here's a whole bunch of things you can do to not write a validation. And a lot of those things we did not have for a long time, right? So
Yeah.
If we're in an org with a whole bunch of validation rules, is there any benefit to, I guess, refactor the validation rules and maybe remove them and replace them with dependent pick lists or dynamic ones?
I think for things like dependent pick lists and maybe lookup filters, I'm not sure if dependent pick lists are like triggered. Okay, my point is maybe you should still keep the validation rules and then think through how your app is designed, but and also keep the validation rules. If you can substitute it with a lookup filter, lookup filters also are strict or they're triggered when with API changes. So that's one that you could get rid of a validation rule. But I don't think dynamic pick design. I think dynamic pick list as well. So
Yeah,
those
if you,
there are some that
as I say,
there's
if you
some that you
combine,
could use both. Mhm.
yeah, or if you combine your, you start using restricted pick lists, I think
too.
then you could get away with some of those. But yeah, if you still had non-restricted pick lists, then of course your API can do whatever you want with pick list values. So we'd probably look at switching to restricted pick list values.
Yeah, but most of the things that I talked about is very UI focused. So I will still keep the validation rules and make upgrades to your UI so that it's more user friendly and it's process driven.
Any other questions, comments, bad jokes? No? Well, thank you very much, Lourdes and Danny, for joining. I actually learned something new. So I really appreciate that. And hopefully we'll see you sometime again in the future.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. Great meeting you all.
Since everyone else is mute, I'll do the applause. Okay. So at this point, we're 10 minutes after 2. I know I put 3 p.m. on the on the meeting, but we don't have to go over there. But I do want to open it up to the group since we haven't had an in-person presentation or in-person meeting for a long time. I do want to open it up and kind of like do our own little circles of success bit. So if anyone's got a problem or a challenge or a question they have been working on Salesforce and would like to open it to the brain trust, now's your chance.
I'd also be curious if anyone has any validation rules that they, love to set up or that's their go-to or something that really is helpful and they want to just share about it. That be interested to hear what you guys are doing with validation rules too.
I have a question.
Okay, Steve.
I'm new to the group. My name is Steve Vanderweddy. I work at the Department of Administration, and I oversee a couple of orgs for a Salesforce environment that's being adopted by DSPS, another state agency. I've been in my role for just over a year, and I find Salesforce to be really fascinating and powerful. One of the areas where I would find some help from this group is what recommended Trailhead courses or certifications would be a good place for me to start in getting learning more fundamentals about Salesforce as an environment.
Okay. I guess my question back to you, Steve, is what about Salesforce are you interested? Are you just looking kind of like for general information right now?
Yeah, I think just getting the like an administrative course, for example, and then training, things of that nature, is a place for me to start.
Well, I think everyone would say probably Trailhead as a place to start. Regardless of the current company we have with people from Trailhead. But honestly, that's the first place I would begin. I think there's some mixes for like beginner admins already created out there that you can do a look that does kind of an overview. And it looks like Andy's already posted an example in the chat that kind of gives you a high level overview. But my recommendation to you, and everyone else feel free to chime in and with your own opinions, but my recommendation is after you get through that, find something about it specifically that you want to do from a goal step. Like, do you want to go down to a full-blown admin person that's doing configuration and managing users? Are you more interested in automation? Are you more interested in maybe the back-end platform functionality and things like that, or user experience? Because once you get to the point where you're looking for certifications, besides the basic admin one, it tends to get really specific on topic. And I would never recommend anyone just to go to do certifications just to get a certification. I would say figure out what you want to do first, and then use what certifications out there is kind of like a helpful stepping stone to get to that goal.
Excellent.
I think those cert kind of outlines too that they have out there as resources is like what's on the exam can help steer you with some of that guidance that Brian's talking about. And then in addition to like just to say, I guess, Salesforce is so big and it's only getting bigger. And that's why I think honing in on what really interests you and kind of your specialty, like there's a market for that now. Like, people who really get into flows, people who really get into automation, people who really get into like Pardot, for example. Like if you kind of hone in on what you're interested in and use that as more of a specialty and kind of get the depth of that knowledge there, that's more helpful than having like not much depth, but a lot of information in general about Salesforce. I think that there's just so much you can't possibly know it all.
Just to also throw out, and Steve, hi, good to see you. Thanks for joining the group. For those of you that may have Premier support as well, there are expert coaching sessions, used to be called accelerators. I put the short link in the chat as well. That also has a lot of options for learning, and that would be guided learning. I mean, I'm just looking at like Service Cloud right now. There's, setting up chat for Lightning. There's digital engagement, setting up bots, Service Cloud, Einstein, voice, Lightning. So these are all options that you could use. It's included as part of your Premier support.
Thank you for that information. I appreciate your help.
Thanks for asking a question, Steve.
This coming from a bunch of people that didn't have like Trailhead when we first started with Salesforce.
You young whippersnappers have it so easy now.
It's such a good resource, though. I'm always whenever I'm Googling and I see a Trailhead module pop up, I'm like, "Ooh, I'm going to start there."
The only downside to Trailhead, and this is no fun with Trailheads, is it's generic Salesforce, right? It's not going to teach you anything about your specific situation or use case in your org, right? So like if you have something that's very customized to the Department of Administration, that's was built for your organization, you're not going to find anything in Trailhead to teach you about that. That's the only thing to realize, that you know, you're going to be learning about features that may not even be enabled in your org. May not ever be enabled in your org. But if you're looking to be more of just a well-rounded, knowledgeable person, Trailhead's great.
That's a good point. I also say that to my users too, because sometimes I'll point them to a knowledge article like on Salesforce itself, like help article or something. But I give that to them with like warnings to say, please don't just Google about Salesforce, because you're going to end up reading and going down a rabbit hole of something that like we might not even have or would need to purchase. And I wouldn't ever want them to be steered the wrong way.
Yeah, like what we do with our customers is, if we're going to try to help someone with reports and dashboards, we'll send them to Trailhead to say, go to Trailhead, do the report and dashboard badges, because that teaches them how to use the tool. Then we come in and say, now let's show you how to use the tool specifically to what your business process is in your org. So you know what report type you should select, and you know what type of filters you may have to consider for the type of questions you're asking. So
I really like that, Brian. Could you share what Trailhead you send to users in regards to reports and dashboards?
Let me find it. I think it's really simple, where I just literally search for reports, and the badge and pops up. It says reports and dashboards for Lightning.
I think I even have a mix that I put together specifically, because I don't think it's necessary if they're brand new to Trailhead. It's not just the trail of like doing reports and dashboards that I like to give them. I like to give them the like intro to Trailhead, so they don't, you know, so they understand that they need to create like a trail playground and things like that to complete the module. I've let people loose just on a trail like module before, and it didn't end well. So let me find my mix and I can add it to the chat here.
Anyone else have a trail mix they want to share? Since we're all posting trail mixes now.
I know.
I was gonna say, I love this. That I hope you're not doing this on our account, but I was actually just going to share with the Trailhead team that you know, we're participating in this user group meeting, and everybody's throwing trail mixes and trail, like, you know, it's awesome. So good to hear.
With the feature request, how about this? It'd be great to be able to favorite a trail mix, like I can favorite a module.
Yeah, there's a trail mix out there that someone created that says, here's all the badges where you don't have to actually build anything, it's just questions. And my plan was just to whip right through those things, and I did the first 3. I'm like, oh, got a customer meeting, and I can't find the trail mix anymore. So yeah, I would love to be able to figure. I should have bookmarked it.
Yeah, you could also use the mobile app to find all those, because the mobile app won't show you any hands-on stuff.
Oh, I did not know that.
Insider tips.
I may have a reason to get the app now.
Well, Brian, you should have it anyway. Because
come on, who has time to do Trailhead?
You can accept user group requests and all that kind of stuff from the mobile app now.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But then I don't have an
now.
excuse not to do it.
I know. I'm sorry. Someone else had a question. John, was that you?
Just starting to take a look at this the CMS that used to be
pretty pricey and is now included free. And wondering if anybody else has experience around that and ways that you've used in your org.
CMS?
Content management system.
Was that knowledge?
No.
No,
Or is that something different?
separate. It's something different.
John, we see it used a lot. I mean, it specifically went free or included with your Experience Cloud licenses because of Commerce Cloud, so that you could track your and descriptions inside Salesforce and then display it in a Commerce Cloud. But it's essentially for those of you that are web people, it's a headless CMS, which means that really you can use it to display content anywhere. So I have customers who use it for like audience targeting as well. So like I can put specific articles on my digital experience or community cloud page that's targeted to specific people. So you can use that to display articles like that way as well. So really any kind of content could be loaded up into Salesforce then and displayed anywhere on the web.
That's cool. I may actually have a use case for that. Andy, you should, if you can, I would love to see an example sometime.
Sure. I would love to see us talk about Experience Cloud sometime.
Yeah, are you volunteering?
No.
We got to get someone else from Salesforce, a Salesforce expert, to come
I know.
talk about it more.
If only we knew people who worked at Salesforce
If only.
that might know the appropriate person for us to bother. I mean, ask
Nicely.
politely on our knees, hands clenched.
Was that all directed towards me?
Well, we have 3 people here now, so you know. Because I'm assuming Lourdes and Daniel have access to the Salesforce Slack. Any other question or things people want to bring up? All right. Well, thank you very much for joining today. I hope everyone found it beneficial. If you do have some mysterious thing that you would like to have answered and throw out to the brain trust, you can post it to our collaborative group on the Trailhead community. And I know I get an email anytime someone posts there, so I'm more or less on top of posts in there. And I know Jen's taking a look at it among a lot of other folks there. So definitely don't hesitate to post there and ask questions. And then hopefully we'll see folks for the Milwaukee on December, what did I say, 13th? 13th. And thank you again, Lourdes and Daniel, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.